now there's that void. And so the body and the mind looks for something else to be able to give that energy to. And food is really an easy place, and eating is really an easy place to put that energy. This is because you feel untethered. You feel unmoored. You don't have a structure. You don't feel like there's something that's anchoring you anymore. That's, giving you that North Star, that direction forward. That act of eating ends up becoming that place. Hello and welcome to another new episode of Emotional Eating Unwrapped. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, and today we're going to talk about compulsive eating. We're going to have a conversation about compulsive eating because many people, they know what their triggers are, right? They know that their triggers are stress, a bad day, maybe it's a fight with someone, maybe it's looking in the mirror and not feeling great about your body. And absolutely, 100% those things can trigger compulsive eating. But there are other triggers too that I want to talk about, more subtle triggers, moments that aren't as dramatic or as combustible in the moment, but later, upon reflection, you realize that, oh yeah, that is where the pattern started. That's where something in my brain got triggered, and maybe it was unconscious. And so I want to bring some of these unconscious triggers to the consciousness in service of helping you potentially be able to go a little bit farther back into the generation and the birth of the trigger, because we might think that it's one thing, but maybe we're focusing on the emotion of the part of the trigger rather than the unconscious part. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about those triggers that trigger compulsive eating that are more subtle. What we're going to talk about today are more woven into our everyday life. And so we don't necessarily see them as triggers until years later. And I'm going to talk about 5 of these moments today. And it's 5 moments that fly under the radar, not because they're rare, but because they're so normalized. And we don't really see them as triggers at all. So as you start recognizing them in real time, instead of in hindsight, you're going to start to see the pattern, and it's going to be really interesting for you as you start to notice these things. And I'll be curious to hear how this type of awareness, this new type of awareness, influences how you relate to your eating and if it helps at all. So before we move forward, I want to introduce myself or reintroduce myself to those who are new or are regular listeners to the podcast. My name is Alana Kessler, and I am a registered functional dietitian. I've been in this health, this wellness, this mindfulness space for 20 plus years. Hard to believe, but I've done all the things. I've worked clinically. I've had my own private practice. I owned a yoga studio and have been teaching yoga for almost 20 years. But my passion really over the last decade or so has been helping people really find love with their body, lose weight if that's a goal, reconnect with yourself, and overcome any kind of emotional or addictive pattern with food so that you can just strip away all of the stress around food, around your body, and live your best life, because that is what we are meant to do. We're meant to be our best selves, live our best life. So if you are new here, welcome. And if you are a longer time listener, welcome back. Let's dive in. The first trigger we're going to talk about is the compliment. Specifically, we're going to talk about when you get a compliment around your body or your weight, right? So you lose weight. Someone notices, they say something like, wow, you look amazing. Have you lost weight? And in that moment, there's a dopamine hit, right? Like you feel good. You feel seen. You feel validated. You feel recognized, right? You feel, you feel maybe there's like a power that you feel, but something else is also happening in that moment. And this is what we're going to talk about. The something else that's happening is that on some unconscious, subconscious level, you are learning that your body at this size is accepted. In fact, you might even feel like it's more acceptable. Okay, you're learning that being smaller gets attention, gets approval. This is what you're subconsciously learning. And all of a sudden, on this very unconscious, subtle level, you have something to lose. Before the compliment came, maybe your weight just fluctuated and you didn't think about it that much, right? Maybe you were just someone who didn't notice so much about your weight. But now there's pressure, right? There's pressure to maintain this level, pressure to keep doing whatever you were doing to lose the weight, right? So maybe your weight fluctuated, you didn't notice it. Maybe you were actively trying to lose weight, but either way, now there's pressure, right? Now there feels like there's consequences. And eventually that pressure becomes unsustainable. Say after you got this compliment, you thought back about how you were eating and you're like, yeah, I was eating less. I was, whether it was intentional or whether it was just something that happened, you're now going to want to go back and be like, well, what did I do? What did I do to get this, to get this result, to get this feedback, to get this compliment? And oftentimes it's less food, right? So oftentimes I've just been eating less and my body dropped weight, but no one can do that forever, right? That's not sustainable. For some of us, and again, if you're listening to this is probably more likely you, but for some of us, we go more aggressively on the restriction, right? Now we try to, it was unintentional before, but now we try to intentionally eat with more rules, with more restrictions that we can maintain this result or we can continue to get that result. But like I said, it's not sustainable. And eventually you boomerang to the other direction, you eat. And when you eat, the pressure that now has been put on releases all at once, and the eating starts to become compulsive because there's stakes, right? So once we put stakes on our eating, and I am not talking about meat steaks, right? Pun not intended. But once we put stakes on our eating, that is the button that is waiting to kind of get pressed that leads to the compulsive eating. That is how the cycle that started with a compliment can turn into shame, right? Because we get the compliment, now we try to reverse engineer how we did it. Then we try to control it. Now that it's in our awareness, we try to be in control of it, unsustainable long term. And now there are stakes around our eating. And so it gets too much pressure, and then we end up eating compulsively. So this is one of those triggers that we might not see until later on. All right. The second trigger is the decision to quote unquote get healthy. Okay. And I'm putting it in quotes because what we often call health is actually control disguised as being healthy, being good for us. So this is the moment when you decide, I'm going on that diet. I'm going to cut out sugar. I'm going to go low carb. I'm going to eat perfectly now, black and white, right? Something that's very all or nothing. And at first it feels empowering. Like you finally have a plan. You finally have a focus. You're finally going to get your life together. You're all of a sudden, you're like, yep, here's the vehicle to this result. And it's all going to be nice in a neat, tidy bow. But underneath that decision, what's happening, like I said, is rules. And rules create rigidity. And rigidity creates pressure, right? Once you create that rule, no eating, intermittent fasting, only eating between these hours of the day, only whole foods. Like I said, you created a binary, right? You're either following the rule or you're breaking the rule. There's no other option. There's no flexibility here. And once the rule breaks, the brain and the behavior becomes predictable. The brain narrative becomes, well, I've already messed up. I already ate outside of my rule. I might as well keep going. And that's when the compulsive eating happens. Because right when we start to break our own rule in our body, the energy gets, our hearts beat faster, the energy gets intense. And this is the energy of compulsion. And all of a sudden, you feel forward momentum and everything starts to happen. Your senses become really heightened and everything starts to happen quickly. And so everything starts to be fast. That's what the energy of compulsive eating is, intense and fast. And so you eat not because you're hungry or because you've decided to enjoy something, but because the rules that you created, those rules created the conditions for floodgates to open. Because there's pressure, and then the pressure becomes a lot, and then the gates open and a rush happens. So that's the energy of compulsive eating. And the challenge with this, though, is that socially, getting healthy and doing these types of diets, they're socially celebrated, right? They're not only socially celebrated, but they're communally celebrated. A lot of times these things are done in community so that people feel like there's a sense of solidarity in doing these things together. So there's the social communal element, which is very important for humanity. And then there's the praise for quote unquote getting healthy. But no one warns you that potentially this, well-intentioned thing that you might be doing initially, it's not where you're going in here knowing that you're creating this. These are things that you might have the best intentions going into doing this thing, like you really do just want to get healthy, but the conditions subconsciously and unconsciously create the context that could lead to compulsive eating. Because no one warned you that this dynamic and this context might be setting up the restrict binge cycle. Right? It might be setting up the restrict binge cycle. And so I'm not saying that this is for everybody, but if you are someone listening to this now and you're like, I don't know when this started for me, right? It might have started as innocently as a compliment. It might have started as innocently as, hey, I want to get healthier and do this, structured program that my friends are doing also. And it seems really organized and like it's, very clear-cut path to a result. The intentions could have been really good, but a lot of times these things can unconsciously set us up for this compulsive eating. And so like I said, I want to go over 3 more, but I want to bring your awareness to this. You've built a good life. From the outside, it looks like you have it all together. You eat clean, you work hard, you take care of everyone, but there's this one area that still feels impossible to master, and that is food. You can eat perfectly all day and still end up in the kitchen at night wondering why you keep doing this. You promise yourself you'll start fresh tomorrow, and I know you mean it every single time. But the cycle, it always finds its way back, especially when you're stressed, when you're overwhelmed, or when you're just tired of being the one that's holding it all together. And I get it because I lived that way for years. And what I learned is this. The problem, it was never about food. It was the pressure underneath it, the perfectionism, the self-doubt, the part of me that never felt safe and secure to just be me. And that's why I created the sober eating sequence. It's a proven 3-phase method that rewires the emotional patterns and the belief systems driving overeating so you can relax, trust yourself around food, and release weight completely naturally, without force and without obsession. Because when your body feels secure, it lets go. The cravings quiet, the self-punishment, it softens, and food, it stops being the thing that you have to fix. This is not another plan. This isn't another rule book. It's a revolutionary transformation for your nervous system, for your body, and for your identity. So join the sober eating movement today. And before we go into our third one, I just want to remind you that if you have been a listener to this podcast and you're not yet subscribed, please subscribe to us on YouTube. We found out that 58% of you guys listening or watching our podcast are not subscribed. So please subscribe to us there. And if you listen to us on Spotify and Apple and you love the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and a written review, because we know for a fact that the reviews and your written reviews and your 5-star reviews, they tell the algorithm that our podcast is worthy. And we get a lot of emails from people saying that our podcast is really helping them in their isolation with their struggles with food, because they're not quite ready yet to maybe seek help. And so the podcast that they're so happy they sort of just stumbled upon is really helping them. And the reason they stumbled upon it is because of you who like, subscribe, and leave us those 5-star ratings and reviews. So please go ahead and do that. We so appreciate it. All right. So the next trigger is the achievement. Okay. So the achievement trigger is one that doesn't always get recognized, but it's the one where you complete something, you advance, right? So you finish a project, you get a promotion, you hit the goal that you've been working towards, and, you get there, you've succeeded. And the expectation is that you just feel amazing, right? It's all just hunky-dory. It's all just good vibes only. But something else shows up too with this. And what shows up can sometimes be a void, right? A feeling of emptiness. Because when you're working towards something, we have a direction, right? When we're working towards something, we have a direction, there's structure, there's purpose. You're left oftentimes with space that you don't know how to fill. And for high achieving people, this can be deeply uncomfortable, right? You're used to striving. You're used to that pressure is a privilege energy. You're used to that. So even though that might be stressful, and having that stress might cause you to compulsively or emotionally overeat, right? To kind of soothe. The other flip side of that coin is that when that pressure is not there, when the striving is also not there, now there's that void. And so the body and the mind looks for something else to be able to give that energy to. And food is really an easy place, and eating is really an easy place to put that energy. And this isn't because you're stressed or because you are celebrating. This is because you feel untethered. You feel unmoored. You don't have a structure. You don't feel like there's something that's anchoring you anymore, that's, giving you that North Star, that direction forward. So food ends up becoming that place. That act of eating ends up becoming that place. All right. So the fourth trigger is the evening alone, right? The evening alone or the time alone. It doesn't even have to be an evening. It can just be like a semblance of time where you're alone or it's quiet, the downshift energy of the day, where there's not a lot going on around you, whether it's at night, maybe you had a lot of people over to your house for an event, for a holiday, and now everyone went home, the responsibilities are over, and now it's just solitude, right? Now it's just quiet. And so for a lot of people, this is where compulsive eating happens. And it's not because anything bad happened. It's just because you're alone with yourself. And a lot of people do not know how to sit in stillness without doing something that stimulates sensation. And eating becomes an activity. Eating becomes an activity because it fills time, it fills silence, it gives your hands and your body and your mind something to do, somewhere to go. And stillness for so many people can be deeply uncomfortable. It definitely was for me 100%. Honestly, yoga and meditation has saved and changed my life, and being able to learn how to be in stillness, how to sit in the boring parts of life. And not only that, not just like survive the boring parts, but actually be able to flip the switch and really learn how to see the solitude as a source for thriving, see the solitude as an opportunity to recharge and renew, so that we're not necessarily needing to distract ourselves away from the stillness, but we actually want to settle even deeper into the stillness. That is a skill. That is a skill that is, it's immeasurable how amazing that skill is. I can speak for myself, and I could speak for so many of my clients who have been taught how to do that through the sober eating method. It's an unbelievable skill to learn how to source solitude as a place for self-worth, self-love, and just a deeper commitment to yourself and to your goals. And it becomes an opportunity for success rather than a place where you can end up allowing it to become a trigger for compulsive eating. Because for a lot of people, when you're not comfortable with solitude and with stillness, food becomes a way to avoid that discomfort. Okay. And the last trigger is the good day. The good day is the last trigger. And it might be really surprising because this is the day where everything's great, right? Everything is going right. You're feeling confident. You feel capable. Things are working, right? Your business is making money. You just worked really hard on something, right? And like everything is just going right for you. And you find yourself strangely later on eating compulsively, and you're confused. And what often sits underneath good days is vulnerability. It's when things are going well, part of your nervous system doesn't trust. It doesn't trust that this is going to stay. So whether that's in your life, you know, a lot of people can connect to this when it comes to relationships. You had a great date. You've been seeing somebody for a couple of months and it's going well, right? Like a lot of times interpersonal relationships trigger this vulnerability because on some level we're waiting for the other shoe to drop. And if you've lived in a place where, you know, you were in survival mode, or you have been over functioning in relationships, or you're so used to people disappointing you, you know, or it's just like you've been living in your life has been a lot of survival energy, a lot of anxious attachment energy. Good feelings can feel very unstable. And sometimes compulsive eating becomes a way to bring yourself down and back to a familiar emotional baseline, even if that baseline is shame, even if that baseline is disappointment or regret or self-flagellation. And the reason is because, and I'm thinking about this and I'm sighing like that because I know that was for me for so long. It was like I would get to these heights of feeling so great about something, but it's like it was too high and I couldn't sustain that. And so I would find myself binging and purging to bring myself back down to a level that is known for me, you know, that was known for me, which was, you know, because it's like if you're not so high, you don't have as far to fall. And it took a really long time for me to get comfortable with things being good and being able to stay in that state of elevation. Obviously, nothing is perfect all the time, but not needing to almost sabotage my own heights from a level because I needed to get back down to a certain emotional state that felt safe and comfortable for me, even though that state was, you know, a feeling of, you know, of shame or of not feeling good in myself, of low self-worth. And the reason that happens is because until we elevate our sense of identity, where we believe we deserve to feel good, we deserve, we're worthy of those heights, those emotional heights, those life heights, you know, the known feels safer than the unknown experience of things going well. And that's a real truth, right? On the outside, things going well could seem great, but if your nervous system isn't comfortable with things going well, then compulsive eating and, behaviors that take you down, really bring your self-worth down, those things can creep in, and they could even feel more comfortable and, on some level than things going well. But we want to train our nervous systems. We want to move from needing to kind of keep the ceiling really low on our lives to being able to, break the glass ceiling really high on our lives and not be afraid that we don't deserve it, because we do, and you definitely do. All right. So what these triggers have in common are that these triggers, they all create moments where you feel something internally that you don't quite know how to sit with, whether that's pressure, whether that's emptiness, whether that's rigidity, whether that's stillness, whether that's vulnerability, right? All these things are something that you're feeling internally that you don't quite know how to sit with, and compulsive eating becomes the vehicle that creates distance from these feelings. Okay, which is why compulsive eating is rarely about food. Right? Compulsive eating is rarely about the food that you're eating, and it's more about not knowing how to be with what you're feeling. And so when you start noticing these triggers in real time, what happens is that space appears. So the urge doesn't immediately disappear. Okay, the urge to compulsively eat doesn't immediately disappear, but when you start noticing these triggers in real time, the second that you notice it, space between the trigger and the behavior. This is something that is part of the work, is to be able to, it's to be able to take inventory of your internal experience, is to create enough space to learn how to do that and find those answers within you. And this is how this moment of awareness can change your relationship to the compulsive eating. And you're no longer just reacting to something unconscious, right? You are bringing it to the consciousness, you're observing it, right? You're observing it, and then you're interrupting it. You're interrupting it through tools and through questions and through different ways to integrate the feelings, right? This is a lot of what I teach, especially in the invisible weight detox. This is 100% what I teach in this introductory program that I have to the sober eating method. We go through a lot of these in a lot of different real world scenarios. And it's not always perfect, right? It's not always perfect, but that's not the point. The point isn't to be perfect, because it always will be enough to create change, to start creating change. Absolutely. Here's what I want you to take away from today's episode, that compulsive eating has many, many triggers, and many of them are things that seem normal in everyday life. You wouldn't think to look for them, right? They're not your standard, stress, obvious things, right? A lot of them are, like I said, normal everyday things. The compliment, the innocuous, totally innocent decision to get healthy, an achievement that you've reached, solitude, and having a great day, having a great experience, right? Finally getting what you wanted, finally getting what you wanted, finally feeling happy. These moments, they're everyday moments, and they can seem really insignificant, really small, but they can create really powerful internal reactions. And when you don't recognize the nuance and the flavor of these reactions, it's easy to snowball into these compulsive behaviors that end up leading us to places that we don't want to feel and that we don't want to be in with ourselves. Okay. And it's easy to think that, once these things happen, once you are compulsively eating, it's easy to think that the problem is you and that you have to do something more extreme to get in control of it. But that isn't necessarily true, because what's actually happening is your nervous system is responding to something that you haven't learned how to see yet. And so that's what we're doing here. We're learning how to see. We're learning how to awaken. We're learning how to pay attention. Not with judgment, not with trying to control, but with curiosity. So we can notice the moments right before the eating happens, because the moments are usually trying to tell us something. And once we understand what they're trying to tell us, it's always the first step towards changing it. All right. So that is it for today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. And just a reminder, if you're interested in hearing from me, I do a weekly newsletter once a week where I write an email from my desk from me on topics that are prevalent in the zeitgeist of wellness. I really love writing it. So if you are interested in hearing from me once a week, the Sunday newsletter, you can sign up on the website www.bewellbyak.com. And until next time, I'm Alana, and thank you for listening to Emotional Eating Unwrapped.